All right. Well, it's just about time. I think I'm going to go ahead and get things started here. So I want to welcome everybody and thank you for showing up today, whether you're live or on the internet. Thanks, everybody. This is our second meeting this year for the Competitive Intelligence Working Group. So I know a lot of you have been with us the last 3 years. If you're new, welcome. The whole idea behind the group is we want to bring together people across the academic spectrum to share best practices within competitive intelligence and really kind of build out this idea of using competitive intelligence at the university level. And that's basically it. We've been getting together for the last 3 years, having these kind of meetings, sharing ideas and networking and getting to know each other, going to NORDP and things like that. So I'm going to talk today. Let me introduce myself. I'm Karen Walker. I'm the Assistant Director of Research Development at ASU. And before we start, I am going to share my screen and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we'll be doing in the near future. If I can get this going. So we've got a couple of meetings that will be coming up in December and February. I'll be sending out information on how you can attend these remotely. December 13th, we'll have a presentation from Marcine Snyder, Amy Burdett, and Lauren Rita from Johns Hopkins University. They're going to be talking about researching foundations and philanthropic LLCs. So that should be really interesting. That's something we've never discussed before. So this will be a new angle on things that I think you'll want to tune into. And then in the new year, February 28th, Kaushik Balakrishnan from Research Development Services from the University of Arizona is going to be talking to us about the mechanics of CI at the interface of research development and corporate engagement. Then that's kind of another angle where we haven't really talked about corporate engagement and how that interfaces, how those things come together with research. So both of those sessions I'm kind of excited about because those are things we haven't looked at before. We've been really focused pretty much just on things coming out of the research office or the units working with research. So I think these will be two sessions that will be really informative to us. So, like I said, I'll send that information out coming up soon. So what I'm going to talk about today is this idea of building out your competitive intelligence function at your university, at your organization. So what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to cover these things. So we're going to talk about why are we even talking about this? You might say, well, why is this useful to me? Well, hopefully I'll explain that. How you grow a CI unit. Oops, sorry, my clicker went back. Kind of developing the capabilities of your CI unit or function. And when I say CI unit or CI function, I'm kind of applying this in a vague way because the way I look at it is it could be one person working part-time, it could be a person working full-time, it could be several people. So if I say function or unit, you can apply that however it works for you. We're going to talk about your customer base, which is critical to your existence. And then also this concept of finding a champion. And I'm going backwards. So why this topic in particular? Well, in the last few years, especially after the first time I went to NORDP and talked about CI, I had a number of people come to me and say, oh, well, how did you, develop this at ASU? How did this come to be? I think a lot of people either hadn't heard of competitive intelligence before, or they were surprised that we received so much support to develop a full-fledged competitive intelligence function. So I got a lot of input that people would really like to hear about how they could build that out, how they could do it. And so I thought it would be good to talk about it. I can offer my experience. Obviously, the way we did it here at ASU may not be applicable to everybody, but I think hopefully the ideas and takeaways I can provide will be useful to you moving forward. And I want to say, you know, it's been like an 8-year journey. Now, this is where we're at right now. This is my team, Keith Aspinall and Jamie Welch. And they are fantastic people, fantastic analysts. They're really smart and creative, and I'm like so lucky every day to come in and work with them. You know, like I said, it was a long journey, and it was not something that happened just overnight. So I want to get across to you that you know, doing this kind of thing in an academic environment where it's kind of a novel idea still in a lot of ways may not be easy. You know, it took hard work, it took persistence, building a lot of connections, and frankly, you know, a lot of luck. So if you're working on it, just hang in there. But I can say right now, I'm really grateful to be where we're at right now and have the support we do have. So I want to talk about this idea of CI unit maturity stages. And I'm going to borrow very freely here from SCIP, which is the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Organization. I've taken a lot of classes and webinars and things from them, and I recommend them highly. And one of the things that they've talked about in several of their classes is this idea of maturity stages. So I borrowed from them and also kind of put some of my own experience into it to try to get across the idea of how a unit grows and the kind of events or things that have to be in place. So initially, you're starting out from a position of being reactive, but what you want to do is get to a place where you're proactive. And so what happens, the things that are in place initially, you're probably part-time staff, right? It's probably somebody working, they've got another job title, they're doing something entirely different, but they may be doing some competitive intelligence activities. It may not even be half-time, it could be, you know, just a small portion of their work. But as you start moving across this spectrum, what you would like to see is full-time staff, because with more resources, you're going to see growth in this area. You're going to see more capabilities. So full-time staff, maybe it's somebody working full-time, maybe it's 2 people working half-time, whatever. You want to see those improved resources thrown towards this intelligence activity. Initially, the products are going to be what I call ad hoc products. So a lot of it's going to be kind of one-off requests. The initial requests don't necessarily have long-term goals or strategic goals in mind. It could be people asking for simple data requests. And a lot of times in those early stages, the work that you're doing may be mostly in that sort of collection or gathering phase. You know, we've talked before about sort of the competitive intelligence process or cycle. So there's like gathering, there's analysis, there's that transformation into intelligence and dissemination. A lot of times early on, you're kind of stuck in the gathering stage. So you may be gathering data from some other resource and just handing it off to somebody. So those early products don't have a lot of direction, may not have a lot of sophistication, but obviously as you move along, you want to develop a more strategic, forward-looking line of thought. You also want to start developing things without being asked, and that comes with a knowledge of your organization, a knowledge of your customer base, a knowledge of the research landscape, so you can anticipate things that are going to be needed and start developing those products without being asked for them. Initially, your customer base may be a single customer. It could be your direct manager. It could be somebody a little further up the chain in leadership. Or you could have a small customer base within a unit, but you may feel kind of siloed, that you're only giving your reports to a very small number of people. Obviously, as you expand, you want to widen that customer base so that you're your reports, your products are being distributed amongst a large number of people. And that shows not only a valuing of what you're doing, but that you're capable of doing a lot of different things, providing value throughout, and you understand more and more of your university's capabilities and needs. Finally, the sort of resources you're working with, your process may be very minimal in the beginning, and this all ties back into this idea of you have a limited customer base, limited requests. You may not know the resources actually that are available to you. You know, initial resources might be things like just the awards and proposals database of your university. Maybe you go out to the NSF or NIH database, things like that. You don't have standardization of the products you're doing because you're doing one-off products. So you're doing different things all the time. Again, as you start maturing and figuring things out and developing more capabilities, you want to move towards that sophistication in your techniques and presentation. As you educate yourself, learning more analytical techniques, becoming a better critical thinker, developing more sophisticated graphics and presentation that will make your products really stand out. And I would say the thing for me when I think back about our process, the thing for me that I felt really sort of flipped the switch to help us go from that reactive side to the proactive side was this idea of developing products with actionable insights. So going from just doing sort of these data dump type of products where you're just sort of regurgitating or repackaging information to actually providing your stakeholder with actionable information so that they can take that and make a decision. And that's really the goal of being competitive intelligence. That's a sweet spot. That's your value add. You know, when you can take something and give it to them and they can say, oh, okay, I didn't know that. This is important for me to know. This helps me figure out what I'm going to do next, what action I'm going to take. So with that in place, once you're able to start doing that, I think everything else just sort of flows from that. So taking that idea of maturity level and applying it to what happened here at ASU, I don't want to bog down in all the details about our history over 8 years, but I thought it might be a little bit informative to talk about it. So initially, when I came here back in 2010 and got in the research office, my background had nothing to do with this. I was coming from California, where I'd worked in the biotech industry for about 15 years in R&D, making molecular diagnostic assays. So I had a background in being able to search through literature, search through databases for genes, things like that. So I could find things. I was kind of good at that. I was hired in to work as an analyst in our group, which at that time was called Research Strategy. It was a brand new group. There were about 4 of us. And our whole goal was to work with faculty to kind of connect them up with funding opportunities. So we were still trying to figure out sort of what we were doing. Almost immediately after I was hired, our limited submissions manager left. And so then I became a limited submissions manager. And so I had no experience in this at all. So it was a steep learning curve for me. And I know a lot of you guys do limited submissions, so you know that that can be a full-time job. So this first couple of years that I was working, we didn't call it competitive intelligence, it was sort of reporting activities. A lot of my time was actually spent doing limited submissions. So as you can see, 2010, 2012, I wouldn't even call it a half FTE that I was doing intelligence. It was the same kind of ad hoc things, gathering information. I might go out and gather awards information for our VPR. There wasn't a whole lot of analysis. The data I was pulling was from budgets and things like that. So very much kind of locked into that silo of I'm gathering data, I'm repackaging it, and that was about it. But I had this feeling like it really should be much more. I had a feeling like we really should be doing some sort of analysis. We should be doing something with it. So I started trying to educate myself. Somewhere along the line of late 2012, 2013 is when I found Skip, and I don't remember exactly how I found it, but that's when I started learning a little bit more about competitive intelligence and started using that phrase, competitive intelligence, and trying to kind of share that with people around me, and started picking up some more analytical techniques. Then I started applying that to some of the data. Again, I didn't have a lot of time to work on it, so a lot of things were in a very primitive state, but I was at least progressing. It felt like there was some progress there. Documents were starting to go outside of the research office. We were starting to get faculty interested in certain things, starting to do analysis of programs, and developing some template documents. In 2015, I have one full-time equivalent there. That I really transitioned more in 2016, but it was towards the end of 2015 that it started to change. The big thing there was that Skip offered a fundamental certification in CI at that point online. So I devoured those courses, took those, got the certification at the beginning of 2016, and that helped immensely. So that's at the same time that it coincides with that idea of always providing insight. Our customer base was really expanding at that point. We had a lot of, I started repeating a lot of methods, developing a process at that point, figuring out what our process was going to be. And at that point, things started to take off. In 2016, Keith started working with us part-time. He was in another office. There was another person in another office that was working with us part-time. People started to refer to us as the CI team, even though we weren't all together in one place. We started thinking more about the overall strategy of the university. What were goals that the university had for research? What were areas we were strong in? You know, what were products we could produce, again, like proactively? We were getting much wider distribution because at that time we developed a Dropbox that we could put all of our products in, and people started, originally just leadership subscribing to the Dropbox, but then we started getting faculty and other folks. We had team training. Everybody, the three of us, went to a Skip boot camp that they held here in Mesa, Arizona. So we all had the same training. We were all on the same level playing ground when it came to competitive intelligence. And then finally in 2017, Jamie joined us that summer. You know, and it was just that same upward curve. Jamie brought a whole lot of ideas with her, and it was sort of that synthesis. Keith came over full time, having all of us together. And then finally, the last component, when I talk about improved product design, I think a lot of you may have been here earlier this year. We had the seminar with Michael Northrup, who talked about how to do graphics for our reports. And Michael is our graphic designer, so he gave us a lot of tips and tricks, and he also helps us design our products too. So that just kind of blew everything up. But you'll notice I don't have us going, that black bar and the proactive is still out there on this horizon. And I think of it as an infinite horizon that we'll never reach, because you always want to have that goal. You know that there's always more you can do. You can always improve. So we're constantly trying to improve our products, constantly trying to get better, understand leadership's needs more, and so on and so forth. So I think there's always room for improvement. I wanted to talk about productivity a little bit too, because I think everybody always wants to have metrics to measure themselves by. You want to be able to show that you're providing value. And a lot of times, I think people feel the need to do that in terms of dollar signs. And it's really hard to do with competitive intelligence because I know for us, especially, we're very much sort of pre-proposal stage, sometimes early ideas for initiatives or hirings or what have you. So I like to think of it more in terms of our productivity and in terms of our client base and how that may expand or how we get repeat customers. So in terms of just productivity, I can go back and look at in 2014, when I was doing it half-time, I did 28 documents. So it's not bad. That's more than like 2 a month. So that's pretty good. If we look at 2015, it's about the same. It's about 31. So then if we jump to 2016 and we say 2 full-time equivalents, which not quite, but really about 53. So that's pretty good. Now 2017, we added Jamie mid-year. You could quibble, it's 2.5, 3. We were up to 93. Now you might say, well, that's good, but it's not linear. I mean, you might expect if you do 30 at a half FTE, then you should do 60 at 1. You should do 120 at 2. You should do 180 at 3. But the thing is, over time, we're also increasing the complexity of what we do. We're increasing sort of the quality, the details. Everything that we're doing with our documents is getting better and better. It's that old battle of sort of quantity versus quality. So yeah, we could crank out a lot of very simple documents, or we could really put a lot of effort into these documents and turn out some really high quality documents. And I will show you what I'm talking about. Because if you look back, here's a document that I put together back in 2014 by myself. So you could look at it and say, well, it looks like a perfectly nice little clean Word doc, and it's fine. Here's one we did last year. And I can't show you the insides because I can't give away any secret sauce. I would get in trouble. Actually, my VPR is right here, so I can't say what's inside. But you can look at the contents page and you can see the amount of content we put into it. We're looking at all sorts of things like this is a program analysis. So we're going through not only the program, we're looking at potential industry partners, university collaborations, national lab correlations, and what are the key takeaways, so that we're providing recommendations in here, and we have an appendix. So this is a pretty nice report. But earlier this year, we produced what I think is sort of the yardstick for the very best we can do, which is this report that we produced on DoD's science and technology interest, and this is an interactive report. So this report, we got the help of, again, Michael Northrup, our genius at graphics. We had the content together. He started putting graphics together, and he said, oh, why don't we make it interactive? And we were like, what? But you can actually click through this report. And so we provided all these science and technology areas, which are at the bottom. There are 9 of those, which we analyzed what DoD was interested in and how ASU could work with that, and then provided a summary, recommendations, and then a background about the geopolitical situation. And you can click all through this report. So I'm showing this I don't want to come off like as a brag, but I'm showing this as the potential growth. As one person, I could only do so much. When you bring more people together with all their skill sets and capabilities, it's amazing what you can do. So talking about capabilities, I'm not going to talk about in detail about process or mechanisms or analytical methods. We've had some talks about that before. We actually had a really good talk. Jamie did her talk about scenario planning. That's a specific technique. And then Alba and Matthew gave a really great overview back in April that's still available in the slide decks. So I'm not going to go into great depth on those kind of things. What I want to talk about is sort of an overview of things you need to have in place to be successful. And one thing is, when you're thinking about your education, I can't stress enough going out and getting those resources, whether it's SCIP. There are other good articles and books that I'm willing to recommend to people. There's companies that do competitive intelligence work that have a lot of nice example documents that we've definitely looked at as aspirational documents. You can go out and get training. One thing I was thinking about is a lot of times we have an emphasis on tools, and tools are great, but they're just tools. The most important thing is your ability to think, your critical thinking capabilities. And it's really important before you ever sit down at the keyboard and start using those tools and typing in keywords that you're thinking about the problem you're trying to address and what are the questions you need to be asking. So before you ever type in that keyword, you should have, whether you write it down, whether you have it in your head, you know, what are the key questions I'm trying to resolve? What is my stakeholder trying to address? What are their issues? What are their interests? What are, you know, risks? And there are a lot of questions you need to have in your head before you sit down. So don't discount your own thinking and think that the tool is everything. I know a lot of people focus on the tools, and they are important, and it's good to know how to use them, but it's also really important to think through the problem first. The other thing is I'm going to hammer on this idea about insight, and I know it may drive people crazy, but this is really our value add. A lot of times, you know, people don't understand what CI is. They don't understand what good it is. If you're not providing insight to people, then you're not doing your job. So every time you're giving somebody a product to somebody, make sure you're adding that insight. Even if it's something as simple as you're sending an email with a link to an article to someone, take 10 minutes to look at that article and find something in that article that will be important to them. And then write a sentence, write 2 bullet points, whatever. That will be so much more valuable to them than you just forwarding a link that they get and they go, what is this about? If you can find something in that article, if you're sending on something from NSF has made a change to a program or whatever, point it out. And even if it seems obvious to you, it may not be obvious to them, especially if they're in leadership and they're a busy person and they don't have time to read every email they get every day. If you point something out, there's your value add right there. So don't forget about your role as providing insight. Knowing your organization's research strengths and weaknesses, this is going to be your foundation as the CI person. And sometimes this is just really a matter of time. It takes a while to learn your organization. It takes a while to go out and find this information. A lot of it, some of it will be looking at awards and proposals. Some of it will be talking to people. But it's really important to do this because you become a resource to others. When you can say, oh, we're really good at robotics. We need to fill gaps in this area. But that's going to be sort of your bread and butter. And then when you get these requests to do these different projects, you're not operating from a negative space. You already have an idea about what we can do. So it's really important, that old idea thing about know thyself. It's really important to know your organization and to know what is valued by your leadership. Standardize your products as much as possible, but don't be afraid to refine them. So here we have, in our CI team in research development, we have 5 standard offerings that we provide customers. One is called a capacity analysis. That's inward looking at our capabilities. Another is a sponsor analysis. That's looking at sponsors, obviously. Program analysis, so that's funding programs. We do a review of programs. We do something called a landscape analysis, which is usually looking at some sort of research field and seeing who's prominent in that field and what we can glean from it. And then we have something called external profiles, which is usually profiling people. Typically, we're usually looking at a field, but it could be a one-off profile. So we have these 5 standard documents that we produce, but we produce also different formats of those documents. So we can offer these up to our clients and see what they want. Or if they come to us and say, I want something that does this, we'll say, oh, it sounds like you need a program analysis. And actually, Jamie is putting together a really nice catalog of all of these right now that we're going to put on our website to give sort of an interactive menu. So if people want to look at that, they can go in there and just kind of click, oh, I want this in Excel, or I want this in PDF. This is really useful to you as you move forward, because then you don't have to think every time, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time when you're developing a project for somebody. You know, you've got that. It also gives you an identity, though, with your clients, because they may call you up. I've had people call me up and say, can we get a program analysis of this? Or can you do another one of those profiles like you did before? They start to know what to expect from you. They come to you for the same thing. But don't be afraid to refine it, because that's how you get people coming back and saying, oh, you guys did this. I really like that. We just changed up our capacity analysis about a week ago, or maybe a month ago. I'm losing track of time. But we changed it so we now have a cover page that has a graphic that sort of pulls all the data together in a very simple form. And everybody's like happy with that now. So you can refine it and improve it for your customers. Finally, I want to say, build your network. You have to build your network within the university to do your job well. And that's probably something you know anyway, but there's a lot of different people that you can work with who will supply you with information. You cannot rely on secondary sources on the internet all the time. People will always be a better source of information. They may not be a quicker source, but they will be a better source. So talking to your research advancement staff, talking to project managers, talking to your DC liaisons, any of those people, and make sure it's not a one-way relationship. Make sure it's a two-way relationship. So make sure you can do things for them, and make sure there's give and take so that they see value in you as well, and just be a good person, you know. Also, as you grow, make sure you track your work. This way you'll get an idea of like, how are you growing? How well are you doing? We put everything, all of our tasks in a SharePoint site and track it. We can track it by the type of work we're doing. So like those 5 products we have, we can track it by who we're doing it for. We can track it by the type of leadership or faculty or whatever. This makes it very easy to pull metrics if people are asking about things. It also lets you just see like year by year how it's growing. You know, how are your products changing? Are you producing more of this product instead of that product? Is that the direction you want to go? Is your customer base expanding? Who are your customers now as opposed to 2 years ago? So that's really useful. And I would just say, you keep thinking about like, are you moving in that proactive direction? Where, you know, leadership is going to see you as helping them with their decision making. That's always important. Your customer base, super important to you, because if you don't have customers, you're not doing anything. The number one thing with your customer base is understanding the customer's motivations. So finally, I have gotten to the point where I now have a client checklist. And every time that we get a project from a client, well, unless it's the president, in which case I can't sit down with the president, but every time we get a project, I ask them, can we talk about your project? And I go through this checklist of questions. And the number one question I ask them is basically, what's the motivation for this request? Because depending on what the motivation is, it may drive our product in different ways. And what I mean by that is, are they asking for this because they have a meeting with someone? Are they asking for this because they're thinking of doing a proposal that's coming up soon? Are they asking for this because they are going to set up an initiative, or they're looking to hire someone? There's so many different reasons people ask for things. If you don't know why they're asking for it, you can't do the best work. So you need to understand what's driving their request. And then there's a number of other questions you'd want to ask them. You know, what do they think is the most important thing that they need to know? Sometimes what they think is the most important thing they need to know, as you work on it, you'll find out maybe there's other stuff they need to know that they didn't know they need to know. But understanding what they want, what they expect, is key. And it's also a good way to build the relationship with the customer, to get them involved and hopefully drive some repeat business. But you have to understand also that different customers are going to have sort of different needs and different ways that they receive information. So while we have standardized documents, some people may do better with like a really detailed Word document, while others will just want high-level points. So you may put that in a PowerPoint. So you have to understand the way they're going to accept the information and try to tailor it to them. And then always be thinking about, when you're developing a document, how you can repurpose that and distribute it to other people. Because typically, if you're working on something for one person, it could probably be really useful for other people to see it as well. So you could talk to your customer and say, hey, are you okay if I share this amongst other people? Typically they are. And then think about how that can be shared. And we have so many, I don't know how many we have in our library now, but we're constantly getting asked, do you have a document on, X, on neuroscience or whatever? And I can go in and pull it out and send it off to somebody. And you don't know how many people are going to see it. Usually once it's kind of out in the wild, other people are looking at it. So think about how it may be seen by others or repurposed. The other thing about your customer base is you want to think about not only the people who are your customers, but who are the people who should be your customers, and how could you reach them? So think about who you're currently reaching, but then who are those like obvious gaps? Like, are there whole units that you're not in touch with, and why? Why aren't you in touch with them? What are ways that you could get in touch with them? Do you have a contact that you can work to have maybe a meeting and sit down and talk with them? I've done this before, where I just take some examples of our work, go ask them, what are you working on? Oh, maybe we can help in this area. So those kind of things are really important as you start growing your base, figuring out how you can contact people and expand that customer base. And then also thinking about your channels for distributing things. So obviously a lot of things will get sent via email, but what are other ways you can do it? So like I said, we have a Dropbox. That's one way to share things. You can also do it like on the web. We have a website. It's ASU internal, but people can get documents there. If you have a regular meeting that you attend, maybe you can send your documents out through meeting minutes. So there's a lot of different ways that you can make sure that people know what you're doing and understand it and will want to work with you. And then finally, I'm talking about branding it. It might sound silly, but you do want to have something on your documents that tell people where this was produced, who it was produced by. Now, we have a tiny logo down at the bottom of our documents that says Research Development at ASU. It's an email, but it's also kind of a logo. And so people see that, they get used to seeing it, they know where it comes from, and it helps to establish our identity. So it's just something you want to think about as you're doing this, is you're constantly trying to make people know you exist, and what you do. So this concept of finding a champion, maybe sometimes a champion finds you. It could be a lot of luck. But the definition of a champion is somebody who will value your work. They get what you're doing. They understand how you contribute to the overall research enterprise. So they probably won't be your immediate supervisor. They might be if you're lucky. They might be somebody else in the organization that you have contact with. If they're part of leadership, that's great. Maybe there's somebody who has the ear of leadership. But there's somebody who will go out there and promote what you're doing. Somebody will say, hey, have you seen this report? This is really great, and they'll kind of go out and spread the word about what you're doing. So they kind of expand your base. Now, in my case, I was fortunate enough that I had this person, who is now my manager, but initially she was in another unit. We knew each other. She was using my analyses, thought they were really helpful, was kind of telling people about them. Then she came over and joined our team at that time. We were working together, so I had a really good opportunity to sort of get her to drink the Kool-Aid about competitive intelligence. Then she went off and started the research development team, and I had the opportunity to join her, and I said yes. So like I said, sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of luck involved, but there's also that aspect of recognizing that person when you see them. So if you can build those connections, find those people who are using your documents and work with them, you know, do it. Do what you can to find that champion, build that champion, somebody who will really help you get your place in your organization where people say that, hey, we really need this. This is a function that's really valuable. Now, can you exist without a champion? I think you can. But I don't know if CI can exist without the support of leadership. I think CI is often looked at as nice to have, but maybe not need to have. So I would just say really try to make sure that your leadership understands what you're doing. Try to provide value to your leadership as best you can. So winding down here, I just want to say keep thinking ahead. You know, it's important as whatever level you're at with your CI function, you keep having these goals and thinking ahead. I know when we were, I guess it was back in 2016, and I was going full time, I started really thinking about, well, what do we want to do? You know, where do we want to be with this? You know, it looks like we're starting to build out a team. We've got real buy-in. So, you know, I've got to figure out what are we going to do. And as I was preparing this talk, I started putting together some notes and things and going through my old files. And I'm a Post-it note person. And I came across this note from 2016 that I had put together. And I don't know if you guys can actually read this, but so I had written down my ideas for things that I had to keep in front of us, places we wanted to be moving ahead. And I think you could probably tell that this really aligns with a lot of things I've said in this talk. So we wanted to have clear strategic goals. We wanted to align with the university's strategic goals and the leadership's paths forward. We wanted to steer clear from the data dumps and make sure we kept doing these reports that had actionable insights. We wanted to cultivate a culture of CI, not only within ASU, but this was right after the initial NORDIP stuff. And so we wanted to spread that culture and see what we could do with other universities and see how it could expand. And then the idea of anticipating needs, anticipating what we could do to help the university and not just be in a reactive state. And I have to say, at this point in time, I feel pretty good about these goals. I think we've done pretty well. There's always room for improvement. But now I realize, you know, I've got to make a new Post-it note and think about new goals. But that's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing to always be thinking about how you can improve. And I just want to encourage everybody, you know, whatever level of maturity your program's in, I think I can safely say we've already been there. So I feel your pain, but I can encourage you because there is a path forward. And I think there's a lot that can be done in an academic environment with CI. It just requires a lot of work and a lot of support. And so with that, I'll close out here and take any questions if anybody has them. So, yeah, I don't know if we had any questions via chat. Let's see. See where the chat is at. No. Well, let's see. Oh, Ryan. Ryan was online. he says, +1 on your recommendation to draw out notable details out of the information bits we are sharing and messages that we are passing onward to colleagues. Are you able to speak to the larger institutional landscape as you develop the CI unit at ASU? Was leadership, institutional research area established and stable, or were there new leaders who were in the process of building capacities? I think on some level, a lot of it has been stable. I mean, we've had, Ponch has been here for quite a while since I've been here. So we've had a certain level of stability. Obviously, President Crow's been here much longer than I have. But we've had some changes amongst our colleges. We've had changes at sort of the other levels. I think overarching concerns have been maintained, but I think ASU is very responsive to what's going on in the research landscape as a whole. So if we see an opportunity out there with like the federal funding, then we start responding to it. So for our team, one of the things we try to do is be very aware of changes in the research landscape. And like federal funding, we monitor a lot of things like American Institute of Physics has newsletters that come out regularly. And so we're always trying to stay on top of that to understand, you know, areas that are going to be trending, that are going to be more important to the federal government, because we're always keeping in mind, like, where are those research dollars? I don't know if that really answers your question. Let's see, I had a question here from her. How do you show your value proposition? Yeah, and we've actually, she and I have talked about this before. And again, I don't know that we can do much as far as showing it in dollars, because we don't touch proposals very much. We've tried to do that in the past, and I felt like that number was very flimsy. You know, you can sometimes say, oh, well, we prepared these reports on these different programs, and then we had X number of people submit to it. So there's the potential for, you know, $30 million in proposals. But to me, that's not real. It's not sincere. It's not a number you can count on. So I have tried to show more things like, look at the number of clients we have, look at the quality of clients, who some of these clients are. These are center leaders. These are people higher up in the leadership. Look at the president's office. Look at, you know, VPRs, our executive vice president, and so forth, and tried to show, I don't know if it's more of a quality proposition, really, because I just don't feel we can connect to those dollars the way like people who are actually submitting proposals can. So yeah, it's tough. And I think, and we've talked about this, we could have, I think it would be worthwhile maybe to have a roundtable in the spring about the idea of how we show value proposition, because maybe there are some other metrics we could talk about. And I know other people work in maybe other areas, and they might have some other ideas about how we do that. But for our group, we're just so early stage. It's, I find it, I hate to say ludicrous, but almost ludicrous to try to attach us to dollars.
Karen?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Barely. Go ahead.
Barely. Sorry. Let's see now. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, you're right. It's very difficult to attach a dollar sign, and I don't think that's the path for a service like ours, like our centers. I'm finding that a very knowledgeable person on this is my colleague Mathieu Karamoko, because he has this whole business side to him. He is a scientist and has an MBA, and he's very knowledgeable on that. And we are working right now on a presentation and thinking about how we're going to show our value proposition.
Mm.
So I think it would be a great idea to have a roundtable discussion about this next year or so.
That would be great.
Yeah. And another question. You said you put your documents, it is available for people to use, or do you ever worry about people taking that out of context?
You know, we have at times been a little concerned about that. I mean, honestly, one of the reasons also for the branding was there was one incident early on where somebody kind of misrepresented one of our reports as being their own work. But I think the issue is there's once something gets out of your hands, it's very hard to control what people do with it. Now, we do take stuff, we PDF it, and we try as much as possible to sort of lock it down. But frankly, you know, once it's sent out to one person, it's kind of hard to prevent it from getting used in a variety of ways. I mean, that's one of the reasons we don't put anything confidential in these documents, because we don't necessarily know where they're going to go. We can ask people not to. If we have something in particular that we don't want distributed, we may not put it in the Dropbox, and we'll ask people, or we can stamp it if we don't want it distributed. But most of the things we produce, we assume it's going to be widely distributed and used. And yeah, we can't prevent somebody if they want to, you know, cut something out and use it, or, you know, there's not a lot we can do about that. But it actually, we haven't really seen a problem with that so far.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking.
Now, just to let you know, we control, we absolutely control the flow of our documents. Nothing is shared other than with the client. So okay. we act very different here. And if somebody else wants to use that same document, we make sure they understand all the caveats of the data, all the what was in that document, and how they should draw some conclusions from that document. So we basically do not share anything other than with the client. It's very specific, but I can understand your point.
So is that coming from like your upper management, or is that, where is that decision to do that coming from?
Oh, it's ours.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ours. It is just we find that the products are so specific sometimes to the client needs. And we don't want the data to be misrepresented by another customer. And sometimes there is the question, because we deal with also the company side, the industry engagement, and that changes very fast. So outdated information can really be a problem for the industry side of our work. Their turnaround is very fast. Mm-hmm. So we control everything. If we feel that is a little bit outdated, we prefer not to share.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and we have an issue with, we have to update quite a bit too, and I try to control for, we go in and check regularly if things are getting outdated. So that is an issue when you start building up a lot of documents.
Yep.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Hello, this is Cindy Seggers. I'm the Vice President for Research here at Arizona State University, and I'd like to thank all of you. You are really transforming the way we think about research development in academics, so thanks again. For Ohio State, I have a question. When you talk about client and you share only with the client, is the client an individual administrator or researcher, or is it a unit, or how do you define client?
Could you hear the question?
I didn't hear the beginning of it. No.
The beginning was just a great big huge thank you for developing this area of expertise.
Oh, you're asking who our clients are? Is that?
So the question is, you say you share only with a single client. Is a client an individual, an institute, a college? In what sense do you limit access to this document?
So the client may be an individual, it may be a college, it may be the dean of research of a college. So it may be even an external client, a company. In our case, we have this two sides of our job that is an internal that is more directed to research intelligence, and we have an external that is directed towards business intelligence. But let's talk about the internal side. Obviously, if it is external, it's directed to what company, and that is just to that company. But internally, that it can be a center director, it can be a College of Engineering. For example, we work a lot with our College of Engineering. And in that case, the main customer is the Associate Dean of Research. There is a Director of Operations that we will also work closely with him, and faculty. So when we shared the document, actually that's interesting because we did a lot of work for our College of Engineering for the Dean of Research. So we actually, our product to the Dean of Research and redacted to be distributed to faculty.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important. What I'm finding is that the documents coming out of our shop at Arizona State University have broad value as well as that detailed stuff. So redacting material makes a lot of sense rather than creating a new document for each stakeholder.
Yeah, well, on this example with our research dean of College of Engineering, there was a lot of evaluation of success rate of proposals that the research dean was comfortable with seeing the names of the faculty, but she was not comfortable with distributing that to the faculty that were going to be in the meeting. So there were two levels of products that we came up with.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Alma.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Going once, twice. Okay, then. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and we appreciate it. And we'll get this. We'll have the slides and the recording available shortly, and I'll get the information for the next two sessions up soon. So, have a good day, everybody.